People online see my mouth move. I didn't realize I had my mic muted. Okay. Shabbat shalom for those online. Shemot, or Exodus chapter 2, verse 1 and following says, "And a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and she saw that he was a lovely child, and she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took an ark of wicker for him, coated it with tar and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the edge of the river. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her young women were walking by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her female servant to get it, and opened it and saw the child, and see the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, 'This is one of the children of the Hebrews.'" Now, how did she know it was a Hebrew child? It's a male Hebrew. How did she know that it was a Hebrew?
Circumcised.
It was a circumcised child. And his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." The young woman went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, then I shall pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moshe, saying, "Because I've drawn him out of the water." I want to focus our thoughts today on something we hear here in the South a bit. What's your name, son? And if you go a little further south, the further south you go, the more apt you are to hear the phrase, "And who are your people?" My daughters, Amber and Andrea, went to Charleston, South Carolina, a number of years ago. And they came back with this understanding of it's not just important to ask somebody what their name is. Who are your people? Are your people of the prestigious version, or your people from the wrong side of the tracks? Here in Virginia, we have those that are known as blue bloods, the aristocracy, the old lineages of prestigious Virginia families. And we also have something here called Virginia blue hairs. Anybody know what a Virginia blue hair is? That's the little lady with silver blue hair and a Virginia slim about that long sticking out of her mouth. I digress. We get back to Shabbat now, Mitchell. Pray for me, brother.
Yeah.
What's your name and who are your people? How are you identified? So let's talk about labels. I didn't know this until my sister informed me. Leanne has a daughter, her freshman year at UVA, and Kaylin has developed a relationship with a young guy there. And she's told her mom, "We have a label." I said, "They have what?" She said, "When I was a teenager, who are you going with?" Why we came up with that. Others said, "Who are you talking to? Who are you courting?" Is that. It used to be that you wanted to wear somebody's pin or their letter jacket, right, in high school. Now it used to be we were in a relationship. Now we have a label, whatever that means. But labels, you didn't know that? Now you do. I didn't either. Shema time. Quickly, stand with me. Let's do this. Jerusalem's that way. Say it with me. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Amen. Thank you. So labels are how we define or how we categorize, how we group, or even how we esteem people, places, or things. We put labels on them. For example, terminology is important, especially when you move to a different area, in different culture. Let's answer this question. That metal container on wheels that you place your items in when you're shopping for food, what is that called?
Grocery cart.
A cart?
A buggy.
It's a buggy.
A buggy. And I've heard basket.
A basket.
Yes, I hear that in Norfolk all the time when I'm in the dog. Don't you have any baskets? And I look basket.
No,
They call it a basket.
a basket. We've always called it a buggy. And other people call it a cart. Well, what do you call that place where you buy your food? Grocery store? Does anybody say, I'm going to the market? Supermarket? When Laura and I lived in the coal fields of Virginia a few years ago, a dear old lady called up and said, Sister Phillips, where do you go to trade? And Laura it took her several minutes to figure out she was asking where did she go buy her groceries. But their terminology, where you go to trade.
That's way back.
That's back.
It's 27 years ago.
What is your label? What is your generational label? Are you a boomer? I am.
Yeah. Late.
I'm a boomer. Are you a Gen Xer? Were you born between 65 and 80? If so, you're an Xer. Are you a Gen Y, or also known as millennials, from 81 to around 95, 96? You're a millennial?
Unfortunately, yeah.
We're going to have a prayer service for them. A Gen Z is from 97 to around 2012.
What about the 50s and 60s?
He's getting there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you overlooked that.
We sang about them a little while ago. We said ancient ones.
Careful.
No. Boomers go back into the 50s.
Yeah. We do have someone in the house that's birthday today.
Uh, Congratulations. You survived another year.
Yeah.
Y'all got you through it again. And then we have Generation A, that is from 2012 to the present. Now, those who study sociology will help us to understand and know that according to your time frame of birth, you are shaped by certain world events. I grew up as a boomer with the space age, and space exploration was still very important. But we also were shaped by the fact that our president was assassinated on public television. We were shaped by nuclear threats. Even when I went to first grade, the idea that you had to do duck and cover drills, and you saw the signs on school buildings that said nuclear fallout shelter. Anybody remember those signs? The boomers do. Well, Laura. She just made it under the wire as a boomer.
You're the last of the boomer year, aren't you, 64?
64, the last year of the
I
boomers.
don't remember the signs.
But as you advance through Gen X and Gen Y, the development of technology, from the computer systems, the changing in music, the changing the political schemes and so forth, all of that had an effect. Consider that Gen A, they've never known, this is my grandchildren's era, they have never known a time where countries were not at war. They were shaped by presidential politics under the Trump era and now the Biden era, and the vast differences between the two. COVID and masks and vaccines shaped them. It focuses on their framework of understanding. It develops their filter by which they perceive the world. It's not just a label. It's a categorization of people according to world events and how it shapes them. Your worldview is determined by your early environmental experiences. That's just the way it is. Do you fit the profile of your generation? Because in every generation, there are those who buck the trends. They're different. They stick out. They're unique. And so we come to not labels, but the term in Hebrew is Shemot, names. Your name is part of your identity. And so when Yah says, and these are the names of, and it begins this particular book, generally we speak of it as the Exodus, the story of how people got out of slavery and out of Mitzrayim. It's much, much more than that. That's only the beginning of the story. It is a full book of people whose names the Creator knows. And He knows the names of great people. He knows the names of people who are nameless to us, but because they're buried in the wilderness sand. And people who rebelled. We're going to hear about them. And people who obeyed. There's a couple of them. But we learned their names. While in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, the people of Israel had come to see themselves as a subculture of Mitzrayite society. Originally, they were isolated in Goshen. But in chapter 1, verse 7, it says, and the land was filled with them. So they had spilled out, evidently, beyond the borders of the area of Goshen, and now have permeated all of Mitzrayite society. It suggests then that Israel had located themselves in the midst of the nation, and maybe they'd even taken on a hyphenated identity. We are Hebrew Mitzrites. Could that have been the case? When Pharaoh commanded them to build his cities, we have to consider that they may have been deceived into believing this is your patriotic duty, to build these cities. There's a lot of things that are coerced and manipulated and put upon subculture people within nations, saying, if you're really patriotic, if you really love this nation, then this is what you will do. Anytime you hear from media or people or whoever, it's your patriotic duty, we can either blindly line up and say, yes, that's what we will do because that's what must be done, or we can submit that to the Father and say, is it patriotic or something else? Then the people were trapped. The question's often asked, why didn't they just go back home? I've wondered about that, but I spent some time the last couple of days considering this idea. The way home from Mitzrayim, generally speaking, if I'm going to Tennessee, If I'm going to Clarksville, I am going to look at a map and try to figure out what is the most direct straight line route. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Unfortunately, we don't get to travel in straight lines, but we can approximate what is the most direct path. That's generally thought to be the shortest path to get there. For them, that straight path would have led them right through the land of the Philistines, a warlike people, an aggressive people, an idolatrous people who had no fondness for anyone outside themselves. And they were ill prepared to go through that territory and to fight that battle just to get home. If they could get home, then the land that was the land of their forefathers, the patriarchs, was now occupied by various city-states of the Canaanites. These people were gross idolaters, completely steeped and filled with debauched societies, and they were very strong militarily. They had high walls and fenced cities. You might even say that some of them were infested demonically. It was an overwhelming thought. Why go through all of that, going through a wilderness setting to get there and to get annihilated? Let's stay right where we're at. At least, do you want to deal with the devil you know, or the ones that's over there in somebody else's backyard that you don't know? So they chose to fight the battle that they were familiar with. So do we. That's what we do. Why? Because we know the rules of this game. And we figure that if I fight it correctly, I might win. I got a chance here. I have no shot elsewhere. Israel then, having nowhere else to go, they were being now subjugated to forced labor and slavery. So they had lost their rich heritage. They had lost their covenant awareness. They had lost their connection to the patriarchs and their separate identity, that they came to believe what others said of them. Whatever label the Mitzrites put on them, they were willing to accept. What was that label? You were slaves and you deserve to be so. Without an option, that's all they had. This mentality of a slave-mindedness plagued them throughout their wilderness journey, and it prevented most of that first generation from ever getting beyond the wilderness. They couldn't change their mind. They couldn't rip the label off of their back.
Now, how many generations were there that indoctrinated them of you're nothing but a slave, you're nothing but a slave, generation after generation, 400?
Well, there were some 3 to 4 generations if you do the lineage charts. Matter of fact, Moshe's mother was Yocheved, and she actually was an infant when they came down. If you go through the charts.
400 years in the other writings, it just drops off in the land of Canaan. So it's Egypt or Mitzrayim and Canaan. That 400 so years.
It wasn't necessarily 400 years in
Right,
Mitzrayim
it wasn't.
altogether.
It was just about 200-ish.
From the time that Yaakov, I think, left the land and went to Laban is when it started counting. So, I mean, there's different ways of counting this. So, it didn't take many generations. You would have thought, Brian, in America, that the World War II generation would identify foreseeable history and future. We had defeated the greatest threats that the global earth had known collectively, with Japanese imperialism and Nazism and Italian fascism. we were immediately thrown into a Cold War against communism. American pride was through the roof. Our industry had been rebuilt. We had crawled out of the Great Depression. We had overcome. We were now the lone superpower in the earth in all reality. Until the Soviet Union developed their nuclear arsenal, we were the only nation that had the atomic bomb. We had used them all, but we didn't tell anybody that. But we had that capability. By the time you got to the end of the 60s and we were mired in Vietnam and didn't know how to get out, fighting jungle warfare that we were not accustomed to and against a bureaucracy in Washington. I'm trying not to get political here, but we went from super high expectations of ourselves to questioning the legitimacy of everything in 20 years. How fast did it change for them? From the time that Joseph died and a new Pharaoh rose up and did not know Joseph, where did this new Pharaoh come from? If you study the annals of history, it was a different dynasty. The previous dynasty was replaced by a foreign dynasty who did not understand the previous history. So this is not the son of the Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the previous Pharaoh. This was a brand new line of Pharaohs. That understand, we look at our nation that we're living in right now and we think, how did we get here? How do we get here? Well, it didn't take that long. My father's generation was shaped completely different than mine. My dad was born in the Great Depression. So you didn't waste money. You saved every dollar that you could get. You didn't change jobs every other week. You held on to a job and you worked it harder than anybody else, because if you didn't, somebody was at the door waiting on your job when you got fired, and you could get fired pretty quick. That was drilled in me, son. You do your job better than anybody else, because somebody else will take your job.
No unions to protect you.
So what was Yah's plan for this situation? What was his solution? Yah had a solution. He was going to call on a forgotten reject of a hero in the middle of nowhere to come back and face down Pharaoh. That's Yah's solution. Moshe? Really? He doesn't speak Hebrew very well. When it says he was slow of tongue, it may not have been that he stuttered. It could be that he spoke Hebrew with a thick Egyptian accent and didn't communicate well. We hadn't seen his hide in here for 40 years. Moshe? What's he going to do? So let's ask the question. It's an important question. And it's an answer that we think we might know, but we really don't know. Number one, who is Moshe? Who is he? Well, he was born a slave to slave parents. His mother and father were slaves. So that was his original estate. He was a Hebrew. He would have been circumcised the 8th day and possibly given a Hebrew name on that day that we have no knowledge of. I don't believe that Amram and Yocheved called him Moshe. That's not a Hebrew name. It is now. It's in common use in Israel now, but originally it's not a Hebrew name. It's an Egyptian name. At 3 months, he was placed in a basket, placed in the river, In all reality, according to the command of Pharaoh, Pharaoh said all male children must be placed in the Nile. His theory was twofold. Number one, we're going to have blood sacrifices to the crocodile god of the Nile. Number two, it's called genocide. If we rid ourselves of all Hebrew males, then they as a people will cease to exist. So in 3 months, he was abandoned to some degree to the Nile and left to Yah to determine what his existence would be. He was nursed by Jochebed until he was weaned. That would have been somewhere around 3 to 4 years of age. In Hebrew society, a young child, and a young male especially, stays with mama to around 4, maybe 5, when daddy takes him, places him in a yeshiva, and he begins to learn the book of Leviticus or Vayikra. Now, why would he start with Vayikra? Because mama has already taught him the first 2 books. It says in the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7 and 8, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. My son, heed the discipline of your father. That's the yeshiva process. And then it says, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother. The little one at mama's knee would learn the story of creation and the patriarchs and how that they went down to Mitzrayim. After currently they would learn all through the journey of the wilderness, etc. Moshe would have learned that history, oral history from his mother. Then he was raised as a Mitzrayite prince and called Moshe. Now, Rabbi Ari Khan says, therefore we see that not only does Moses have an Egyptian name, but his name is steeped with idolatrous connotations. How ironic that the Savior of the Jews would be seen as a god by the Egyptians. Moshe is connected to the idols of Mitzrayim or Egypt. After he tried to rescue his original people, the Hebrews, he becomes a fugitive. Man, how many identities and labels does he have? Now he's a fugitive. He's also a rejected hero, both by the Mitzrites and by the Hebrews. And in his mind, his label for himself is failure. My name, my label is failure. But he's not finished yet. For the next 40 years, he's a Midianite. Now, why is that important? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it is important. Midian is a son between Abraham and Keturah, one of 6 sons. All right? So as a son of Abraham, he would have also then been circumcised on the 8th day. Abraham would have been faithful to do that. But when it came to sharing the inheritance, Abraham gave everything that he had to his son Yitzhak. He blessed the other sons, those 6 sons of Keturah plus Ishmael. He blessed them and did what? He sent them away. Why? So they would not compete with Yitzhak for his inheritance. So when Midian finds the territory that he is going to be living in, he looks at himself, I'm circumcised, I'm a Hebrew, and I got nothing. I got a blessing, but Daddy sent me off somewhere to get away from the real heir. that understanding. They know the covenant. They know who Yah is. They know who Abraham is, but they feel like we are outcasts and rejects from the covenant. Don't you think that they might have had a little bit of angst or an attitude about the Hebrew people, especially of the lineage of Yitzhak? What good does circumcision do me if I didn't get it all? So, would they have continued the ritual of circumcising their male children? Maybe not. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to it. So now he's living for 40 years in the middle of the Midianites. And you got to understand that their attitude and their way of life and their worldview has rubbed off on him to some degree. He might have joined in with them. Yeah, those Hebrews rejected me too because I got shoved away. Yeah, I was circumcised, but it hadn't done me any good. I can see him joining in on that line of thinking. And as we read up to this point, then, the last label that we would put on him, he's a shepherd of another man's flock, which means he's a servant. What is a servant? It's about a step above a slave. He's working for somebody else for their benefit so that he might be permitted to stay in the house. Do you see any other labels that you would put on him?
Later.
Huh?
Later.
Later, up to this point. To this point, do you have any other labels you would put on him?
I think you already talked about rejection.
Murderer.
Rejected in family, rejected on both sides. From the Egyptian, Mitzrayim side, and from the Hebrew side.
So he's rejected from all sides, of everyone he's been included with.
So his former identity, he doesn't know what it is.
Can you see that this man does not, just what you say, he does not know who he is. If you don't know your identity, you don't know your destiny. You have no idea where you're supposed to go. When I was coming up, as you were, when you went to the back of the store, there were two doors. One had a man on it and one had a woman on it. I knew which one I was supposed to go in. I still do. But we're raising people that don't know. We're not raising them, but there are some among us that have been raised. They don't know. Which way do you feel today? Well, I think I'm kind of feeling over on this side or that side. It came to me today as I was studying this. It's possible that there is a connection between a rising generation who does not know their identity because the people of Elohim don't know theirs. If we don't know our identity and we don't walk in it, we create a vacuum. Can I tell you that nature and the supernatural, both abhor a vacuum? Yeshua even taught, if you clean your spiritual house and you don't fill it, someone else will. And it'll be worse than it was at the beginning. All right. Well, let's talk secondly then about the importance of knowing your identity. In Jeremiah chapter number 1, verse 5 through 7, Yah calls and speaks suddenly to this young teenager. And says, before I formed you in the belly, I knew you. And before you came out of the womb, I did set you apart. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And Jeremiah said, and I said, Master Yahweh, see, I do not know how to speak, for I am a youth. His label, his identity for himself is, I'm a kid. I'm a young person. And he said, and Yahweh said to me, do not say I am a youth. Stop calling yourself that. He didn't ask him to or suggest. He said, I command you, stop calling yourself a youth, but go to all to whom I send you and speak whatever I command you. But he said, before I formed you in the belly, I knew who you were. What does that say to us? Yah forms us according to his foreknowledge of who we really are. What does that mean, Mitchell? That means that you were wired a particular way to do a particular thing on purpose and by design. And we spend our lives trying to figure out this schematic of who we are. I don't know how many years I spent wondering, why don't I think like everybody else? Why can't I be normal like everybody else? Then I realized I'm the only one that's normal. Everyone else is weird. Why doesn't everybody agree with me? Don't they know that I'm right? I finally convinced my wife that. Took me 39 years, but I convinced her.
Are you sure?
We'll pray on the way home. We'll
Yes.
figure it out.
Me too.
But we are wired differently, uniquely. You see the things you do. You consider and ponder and daydream and estimate the way that you do because that's the way Yah designed you. Now, some have taken that to, well, he made me this way, as if to excuse their perversions and sins. Right. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how you are productive, how you create, how you contemplate, how you view things. And just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean that you or they are wrong. It could be that you are both right. But you're looking at things from two different areas of consideration. If I see it this way, I describe my vantage point, you describe your vantage point, but it's the same thing. Yahweh is not limited to one description. I was praying on my way here today. I said, Father, the word esteemed or glorious, the word set apart, the word eternal. All these are our frail, feeble efforts to try to describe who you are, but none of them really touch the essence of your being and who you really are. They're limiting. But it's the best that we can do. So you are the unfathomable, the unimaginable, beyond the scope of understanding. In the book of Judges, chapter number 6, let's go there. Chapter number 6, begin with verse number 11. And the messenger of Yahweh came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Orpah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezerite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress. You don't thresh what? You mash grapes in a wine press. You thresh wheat in an open, flat place so that you can throw it up in the air. You beat it, thrash it is what we would say, breaking the kernel of the wheat away from the chaff or the stalk of the wheat, throw it up into the air. The heavy grain or kernel falls to the ground, and the wind comes and blows the chaff aside. This is how you separate. But if you do it in a wine press and a vat, you don't have the advantage of the wind. It is a frustrating process because you're working outside of correction. Why was he doing that? He was hiding himself from Midianites because they would come and rob them. Yeshua said the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. When the robber shows up to take away your gifting and your opportunities, it forces you to operate outside of correct methodology. And you end up in a very frustrated place. So when you're frustrated and banging your head on the wall and saying, Father, this is not working, it could be that your method is wrong because you're fearing the robber. Just a thought. The messenger of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, you mighty brave one. What was Yah's identity for him? Mighty man of valor, you hero, you great man, you're Superman. What a mighty warrior you are. Gideon said to him, Oh, my master, if Yah is with us, why has all this come upon us? And where are all his wonders which our fathers related to us? That's what we're asking. Where are the miracles at, Father? Saying, did not Yahweh bring us up from Mitzrayim? And now Yahweh has left us into the hands, given us into the hands of Midian. Yahweh turned to him and said, Go in this strength of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Here's his response. And he said to him, Oh, Yahweh, with what do I save Israel? How do I do that? See, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the weakest or the least in my father's house. The answer? Yahweh said to him, Because I am with you.
Yes.
I'm with you. You're going to deliver your people from their oppressors because I'm with you.
Yes.
In Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 to 19, where it says, And Yeshua, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Shimon called Kepha, and Andre his brother, casting a net into the sea. And here's their label, for they were fishermen. That's their identity. What does that mean? That means that they went to the local yeshiva. They learned with all of the other young boys in their community. And when they got to a certain age, and were in around their mid to late teens, the rabbi would have taught them all that he could teach them at that level. They have memorized books of scripture. The rabbi tests them. He will start quoting out of the midst of the Torah somewhere and leave off, and they're supposed to pick up where he left off and continue to quote until he says stop. In 2001, Laura and I went to Israel, and we went to where in the old city is supposed to be, theoretically, the tomb of David. There's this large sepulcher in this room. There's a chair over to the left that is the seat for Eliyahu or Elijah. And a rabbi comes in while we're standing there looking at all of this. And he's got a gang of little boys, 8, 9, 10 years of age. There must have been at least 12, 15 of them. And some of them got a sheet of paper and some of them don't. And I'll never forget, the rabbi stood there and he starts canting. He is singing a song. And he sings a phrase, and the little boys respond. They're either singing the exact phrase he just sang or the next phrase after him. He sings and they sing, and he sings and they sing. And some of the little boys have to read the paper to know and to learn their lines. Others have done it long enough they know it by heart. And some of them are so enthralled with us, looking over us and wondering, what are these people doing there? They're just moving their mouth. They're not really singing at all. And I'm fascinated by this. And I realize it's over and over and over again by repetition. They learn line upon line, phrase upon phrase. These men that Yeshua is calling had been in the yeshiva, but when it came time to pick the students that would advance on to study the other writings of the sages and go off to perhaps becoming a rabbi themselves, they didn't make the cut. So their role was go back to your family business and work with your father. In other words, they were rabbi rejects. What did Rav Shaul says, or Yeshua said, you go over land and sea, right? And you try to find someone and then you make them twice the child of hell that you are. What is he talking about? Rabbis would travel around looking for star students to take into their yeshiva. The better student quality that they had, the better their yeshiva, the more renowned their yeshiva. They wanted the best and brightest minds to train. It's kind of like, which college do you get into? Are you going to Hogwalla University back in Henry County where I come from, or do you go to UVA? Hogwalla U. Yeah. Horse Pasture College, and then you could graduate to Hogwalla University.
Okay.
2 real locations, by the way.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Just like,
I can take you to the Horse Pasture Fire Department. I really can.
Oh, mercy me.
Anyway,
I know.
you're married to
I was raised in Grassy Creek. What do you expect?
It's correct. It's correct.
Nevertheless, people look at me like, do what? Where was I at? Yeshua walks by, and to those that did not make the cut, he says basically to them, their understanding, come study with me in my yeshiva. The greatest rabbi that would ever walk the face of the earth called these rabbi rejects to come and study with him. And he not only taught them the scripture from a vantage point and perspective that no one else was learning, but he looked at them and said, I give you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the devil, and nothing shall by any means harm you. I give you this power. Now go out and heal the sick and raise the dead and preach the news of the kingdom. I give you authority, he said. And they turned the world upside down. Why? Because they joined him. They stopped seeing themselves as fishermen. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Not fishermen, but men fishers. He turned the terminology around for them. In Luke chapter 5 and verse 8, this same scenario, Luke described it this way. That in connection to that, Yeshua had caused them to catch a miraculous number of fish. They fished all night, caught nothing. They were worn out, washed their nets. Don't throw your nets over on the other side. Master, we've tried that. But because you say so, we'll do it. Now watch what happens. It says in verse 8, and when Shimon Kefa saw it, he fell down at the knees of Yeshua. How close is he then to Yeshua? He's right there. The knees of Yeshua right here at his face. He may even be grabbing him by the back of Yeshua's calves, pressing his face into the knees of Yeshua. And what does he say? Get away from me. What he is saying conflicts with his body language. The physical man is saying, I can't stand it, but the spiritual man is saying, don't you dare leave me. I cling to you because I must, but get away from me because I realize he said of himself, I am a sinner. But a man who recognized I am a sinner, a transgressor of the Torah that I have studied, don't leave me, but get away from me. It is that conflict on the inside of the individual. You have to settle the conflict before you can go any further. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11 through 13, Yeshua says, therefore remember that you once were nations or goyim or Gentiles in the flesh. And notice the phrase in here, it says, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision. That is, there is this group over here that is putting a label on that group over there. He says that at that time you were without citizenship of Israel, stranger from the covenants of promise, having no expectation, without Elohim in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. The circumcised were looking at the uncircumcised and said, go ye. Goy. They're dogs. But now in Yeshua, that's been changed. It's not about whether you're circumcised or not. Circumcision has its place. There is a legitimacy that was spoken of there. But the issue at hand is a label had been put upon them. Do not let someone else's label define you for you. You can't stop them from labeling and defining you for themselves. But you don't have to accept their label for yourself. You choose who you are. And just by the way, just on a side, the honorable thing is to not call someone else by a term or a label that they do not use for themselves. Even if you don't like the person, especially if you don't like the person. We're not permitted to use labels on people that they do not use for themselves. When you put a label on somebody, what have you done? You put them in a particular box. And then what do you do with the box? Well, if you don't like the things in that box, you stick it under the bottom of the shelves and you cover it up and you push people away. If you like the things, you put them out in public view. These are the things I like. These are the people I really like. What if Yeshua did that? How many of us would be on the bottom shelf and covered over? So again, let's remember that Moshe's name was given to him by his Mitzrite princess mother. Let's go back to the book of Shemot. I want you to notice something other in chapter 3. Do we know what Moshe's Hebrew name was?
Maybe it was beautiful. Maybe it was Yahweh.
We don't
We
know.
don't really know.
We can guess. It says in chapter 3, verse 2 through 4, and the messenger of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. And he looked and saw the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. And Moshe said, let me turn aside now and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. And Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, and Elohim called to him from the midst of the bush and said, what?
Motion.
He called him by the name of his exile. He could have called him by the name that his mother originally gave him, and he may have remembered that. But he didn't. He called him by the name associated with the exile, along with his adopted Mitzrite culture and identity. And Moshe also carries then the image of his personal failures and his current servitude. Everything that was negative in its connotations to the name and the identity of Moshe, Yah called him by that. Yah is a realist, the ultimate realist. He knows who you are in your current estate, but he also knows you according to your future. He's not asking us or calling us to be someone that we're not, but rather he's redeeming who we are. He'll take you and your current estate and he redeems that. He's not asking you to change and fix you before he redeems you. Does that come across okay? Did I communicate that well? So he knows our identity better than we know ourselves. Now, we were talking, well, let's continue on in this chapter. Moshe, what's in your hand? What's a stick? It's a rod. It's my shepherd's staff. Traditionally, while a shepherd is watching the flock, feeding and grazing, it was understood that some would carve into their staff images or symbols reflecting certain events in their life. Maybe Moshe had a little basket carved into his staff. Maybe he had the crown from the days of his being a prince. Maybe he carved a well where he met his wife. Symbols that reflected who he was. Maybe he put a pile of sand on there where he buried the Egyptian. What's in your hand? It's my staff. It's my rod. Throw it down, Moshe. When he did, it became a serpent. What did Moshe do when it became a serpent? He ran in the opposite direction. After Yah calls him back, pick it up. He picks it up by the tail. Wise move, Moshe. Wise move. It becomes a staff again. Moshe, your life history is serpentine. It's built on lies. That's what the serpentine philosophy is. It's lies. Pick it back up. I am able to redeem your staff. If you look in chapter number 4, it says in verse number 4, what's in your hand? He said, a rod. When you look a little bit further down in the chapter, verse 20, Moshe took his wife, his son, set them on a donkey, and returned to the land of Mitzrayim. And what does it say? Moshe took the rod of Elohim in his hand. Same wooden object, a different identity. His historical past recorded on that rod had been transformed into the future that Yah was decreeing.
Wow.
Yah wants to change the rod in your hand from one that is built on your past to one that's built on his decreed future.
Amen.
All right.
But you got to pick it up.
Yes.
When you realize the serpentine ugliness of it, you've got to pick it back up and deal with your stuff. So let's answer the third question or the third thought here. Who are you? Who are we? You don't have to necessarily say it out loud, but in your mind at least, what is the number one word you would use to describe yourself? If I were to ask you, who are you? Instead of giving me your name, you're going to give me a descriptive word of yourself. What is that word? What is the chief, primary, number one way you use to describe yourself? How do you see yourself? Is it based on your past, your history, or your destiny? Are you still walking in life looking behind you and say, well, yeah, historically, what the evidence shows, the proof of the past shows that I am, I said, I've redeemed that. I'm asking you to look in front of you and declare your identity, because your identity understood determines where you're going. If you're still calling yourself who you were in the past, the only place you're going to go is where you've already been. To go somewhere differently, you've got to change your mind about who you are. So you can't say a man can't never have nothing, a man can never get anything. We might as well just kind of go with the flow, or all of these passive, yielding, submitting, defeating ideas that we have about ourselves. I shared this before. I think it's important. I spent, of my now 60 years, I spent probably 45 of those years lamenting things about myself that I had no choice of. My DNA was determined for me. I had nothing to do with it. Yah did not say, okay, give me the parameters of your being. Give me, what is it that you want? What color hair do you want? What color eyes? What size do you want to be? Any of those things. He never asked me. He just stuck me in this frame and said, deal with it, son. I literally laid in the floor as a teenager and asked my daddy, take me by the ankles and pull and see if we can help my legs to stretch. Because I was measured for measure with everybody else once around, 7th, 8th, 9th grade. And then guys started shooting up. Everybody else, it would seem, was growing up to 5'10", 6 foot, 6 foot plus. And it's like, hello? I fasted, I prayed, I ate, fasting didn't work. I ate. My nickname was Hoover, just hoover it in. If it was on the table, I ate it. Dad, pull the legs, see if, I can stretch, do something, anything. I exercise. I was strong. I was athletic, but I just never grew into the stature that I imagined I desired for myself. And so I beat up on myself because in my mind, physical, not measuring up physically, meant I didn't measure up in any other way either. And finally, I literally stood in front of the mirror in our house and started talking to myself and said, give yourself a break. It's out of your hands. You are who you are. You are as He designed and made you. Who you are on the outside does not limit who you are on the inside. So
Amen.
get over it.
Hallelujah. Amen.
So our destiny is to be out of, our calling, or Ya'ed, which means calling and destiny, is what we do to get there.
To reach the ultimate perfection.
But that's a long travel. That our calling goes in how many different directions? How many burning bushes do we go by and don't recognize?
You could say that 10 times. Absolutely.
But ultimately, our calling leads us to our destiny, in my mind.
Dr. Miles Monroe said it this way. Before Yah created us, He created our ultimate destiny. And then He took us back to a beginning and created us and pointed us toward what He's already called and established for us. He knows our end before He has made our beginning. Now, whether you choose to stay on the chosen path to get to where He desires you to be is up to you. So in chapter 3, verse 11, I love that the rabbis say that Moshe stood and argued with Yahweh for 30 days. Ultimately, when you make Yah lose his temper, that's
That's when you go on long walks.
verse number 11, Moshe says to Elohim, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Mitzrayim? Now, we can read that a couple of ways. We can read it as him saying, who am I that you want to send me? And that's the easy way to read it. We can also read it as, Master, tell me who I am so that I can go deliver them. I don't know who I am, but if you'll tell me who I am, I'll know how to deliver them. Yah had said just previous to that in verse number 10, He said, come now, I am sending you to Pharaoh. And we easily read Moshe say, who, me? Don't you know my history? Don't you know my past? Don't you know that I don't know who I am? I got all these labels and I can't live up to any of them. Most of them are negative and they water on me. They hold me down. I'm a nobody. Do you see where I'm at? I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. What was he doing out there? Hiding, tending somebody else's sheep. It says in chapter 2 that the people of Israel, their prayer was just a cry of agony. They were just crying out. It doesn't say that they used any words. They just cried out, and Yah heard it, and Yah knew it said. Could it be that Moshe was also in his spirit hearing those cries, and he was running, plugging his ears? I can't stand it. The idea of what these people are going through, and they won't let me help them. I can't help them. Then Yah shows up and says, I'm sending you back to Pharaoh. Who am I? He says in verse 12, because I am with you. We just heard that a little while ago with Gideon. He's asking, how am I going to do this? And Yah says, here's your sign. When it's all said and done and you've succeeded, you'll come back to this place and worship me. That doesn't tell me any mechanics or methodology for the here and now. It just tells me that if I do it right, I'll be back here in the middle of nowhere again. What is Yah's answer to them as to how he's going to do it? He says, I am with you. Yes, ma'am.
It reminds me, I don't want to lower our Heavenly Father down to this, but He is our Heavenly Father. We've got Big Daddy, and we're kids, and we know our Dad is with us. We don't worry about anything. We know it's going to work out. There's nothing negative that's going to happen because He's going to protect us. And we've got to go back to that child mentality because it's a good one. It's a good one with Him.
My dad's favorite rescue story of me is I was hanging upside down in a tree and was hollering, Dad. Daddy was in the house watching a ball game or something other, and I had somehow got myself in a predicament hanging upside down in a tree and couldn't get myself right back up, right side up or whatever. And when he came out the door from hearing me holler and saw what my predicament was, he helped me. He laughed a lot. And he rehearsed that story to me frequently. You remember that time I had to come get you out of the tree hanging upside down, son? Yes, sir, I do. Thank you for coming and helping me out. You know, the Father has to look at us sometimes and say, we were talking about this a while ago. If you thought that was bad, watch what he's getting ready to do.
Yeah.
We watch our children and we think, this is going to hurt. That's a brick wall right in front of them, and they don't know to put the brakes on. It's going to hurt. But what do you do?
We're there to help them when they fall. We're there to help them stand up. We're there to encourage them to try again.
We shovel their pieces into a wheelbarrow and go to a table and say, let me help you put it back together because it's broke. You know? Sure.
I think one of the things that I keep seeing over and over when you talked about Gideon and when he said, if God is with us, so the idea that God had left Israel, he left his people, was there. And then when you read about the spies, so his concern was that whether God was with them or not, right? And even in Moshe, he says, because I am with you, he says, who am I? And he says, because I am with you, I will deliver, I will use you to deliver the people out because I'm with you. And then think about the spies going into the land. And what did they say? They said, we were as grasshoppers in our own eyes. And so we were in their eyes. And here's the thing that I think happens is that God's anger burned against Israel because they knew God was with them. There's no doubt he was in their midst. They could see the cloud, they could see the fire by night, and they refused to trust that God would deliver them from their enemies. It's one thing when you're not sure that God's there with you. I think he has patience for that. I think that he says, I understand you're looking at your own strength, but when I tell you I'm with you, when you know I'm with you, now I expect you to rise up and be who I am telling you to be. And I think there's a whole big difference there that I'm seeing,
Yeah.
And when the disciples knew that Yeshua was their leader, whatever he told them to do, they're like, all right.
Because we know this works.
We know who we're with.
Yeah.
We know who's with us.
It reminds me of 3 young men in Babylon who were commanded to bow down under the threat of being annihilated in a furnace. They said, we know that our Elohim is able to deliver us, but if he doesn't,
If you don't,
we're still not going to bow. The age-old question is, why do bad things happen to good people? Why doesn't Yah always heal when we lay hands on the sick? Why don't the miracles happen continuously like they did in the book of Acts? What's the disconnect? Who's got the button and why are they not pushing it? I can't answer all of those questions. I don't know. But to who else do we go? And where else do we turn? There is nowhere else. And so it's not that he's just the best option available. He is the only option.
yes. Yes.
And so we trust him. And we trust him and we believe him
Yes.
no matter what,
Yes.
to the nth degree, to come through for us and to deliver us. But we still have this mindset, but if he chooses not to in his sovereignty, I will still trust him. Job, why don't you just curse him and die and get out of your misery? You speak as a foolish person. So we trust him. And we will also bless him for the things that he's already done.
Yes.
He's given me and you enough evidence already.
Yes.
Brian, he's rescued us enough already
Yes.
and given us evidence. I'm with you.
Yes.
So the next time a situation develops and comes around, we rehearse the past victories. We don't rehearse the past failures. We rehearse the past victories. But you're right, Cheryl. He was right there. They just couldn't see. Talking about my dad a little bit. Let me share a little bit about this. I remember a conversation with him some number of years ago where he said, I got to find me something to do. What do you mean by that? When we were kids, my dad was what they called the Sunday school superintendent, which meant that he was the one that would open up in the morning with some kind of devotional and prayer, and everybody would go to their Sunday school class, and then he made sure that everybody had, every class had a teacher or an assistant teacher to fill in. He's one that ordered the literature and separated all the literature. As a kid, I would go with Dad to the church and we would separate all the literature stuff and put it in the classrooms. And so that was his job. He did that for 17 years. So when I was a kid, there was never a question, are we going to church today? Every Sunday morning, you knew by this particular time we had to be on our way. So after he no longer did that, he said, I got to find something to do. What did he do? He went to the nursing home and started speaking in the nursing home. There were two sides to the nursing home. That was my first preaching experience, was in the nursing home. One week, we were on the side where they brought them in wheelchairs and with their walkers. And normally they didn't have their hearing aids in or whatever. They didn't hear a word I said. Or else they were on so many, painkillers, whatever. They were sitting there going. So I practiced preaching to that side. The next week we were over on the mental side. I had no idea what planet these people were on. I didn't know this kind of people existed. But their mental instability was so great that they actually had physical deformities. It was bad. But I preached to them anyway. When I left that after about a year and a half, my dad took that over for me, and he did it years. going every week to the nursing home and speaking to those people and loving them. When he could no longer do that, when that ministry had played out, he ministered to his neighbors. But he always had a mindset, I got to find me something to do. When Dad was a kid, they got one pair of shoes a year. By the time that the end of the year had come around, their feet having grown, their feet would be crammed into the end of the shoes. So Dad always got his shoes a little too big because he never wanted his toes, Mom said, to be crammed in the end of his shoes. So when he walked, he had a particular clump sound because of his big shoes. There's a man who lives right across the street from my mom. Well, it's not really a street, it's a road. Grayson Creek don't have a street, it has a road. And the man has a garage over there, and he's got it. He's got poured concrete as his driveway. And that when Dad would walk across to see this man who is admittedly an alcoholic, he said, I could hear his steps. I knew it was him because of the sound of the way he walked. He told Mom he greatly misses the sound of my dad's footsteps now that my dad has passed away. He said, I can still hear those shoes and his steps. So he'd come walking over, and Dad would share the Messiah with him and try to help him get his life turned around. What am I saying? He wasn't qualified in his mind to do a lot, but what opportunities that he had, he seized them because he viewed himself as a servant, as one called to do what his hand could find to do. And he did it well, by the way. In Yochanan 15, verse 14 through 16, Yeshua said, you are my, and here's his label for us, my friends. If you do whatever I command you, no longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, he said. For all the teachings which I heard from my Father, I have made known to you. What does he say? If you were my servants, you would not understand why I'm doing and how I am doing what I do. But you're not my servants anymore. You're not on the outside of this operation. I have chosen to call you friends, which means I now have brought you in on the inside of everything. And I've taught you what you need to know. Now you understand what I am doing and how I am doing it and why I am doing it. I've elevated you. Yeshua does not want to keep you and I in the dark. We're not just feebly feeling our way through this. If we will walk in his commands, he said, I call you my friends. I will bring you in on the inside of the operation. How many times have you walked into a situation of other people and said, what's going on? Why do you say, I don't know what's happening. I see something's happening. I don't know what's happening. Somebody who trusts you will bring you in and say, well, this is what's happening. Let me explain to you. Finally, in the book of Matthew, chapter number 10, we look at verse 14 through 16. Yeshua said, that's not the right chapter, Barry. Are you in Matthew? Matthew 16 through 25. Okay, you're right. I'm right even when I didn't think I was right. Yeshua said, verse 16, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, there's a label that we don't want to wear. Therefore be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they shall deliver you up to the Sanhedrins and flog you in the congregations. Just trying to be an encourager.
Mm-hmm.
Sunshine.
And you shall be brought before governors and sovereigns for my name's sake as a witness to them and to nations. When they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in the hour what you should speak. For it's not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking in you. Well, now we're getting somewhere. We're on the inside of the operation now. Brother shall deliver a brother to death, and a father his child, and children shall rise up against parents and shall put them to death, and you shall be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who shall have endured to the end shall be saved. Are we encouraged or not? He says in verse number 24, a taught one is not above his master, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the taught one to become like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they called the master of the house of Beelzebub, how much more those of his household? In other words, the label that they put on me, are you willing to accept that or acknowledge that it's going to be given to you and still walk with me? Are you willing to bear the shame that Yeshua endured? Now, if we want to preach a religious icon who loves everybody, never judges anybody, and only offers grace and mercy, it does not require you to change your life. You just have to acknowledge, that he's the religious icon. If he does away with the bad stuff that the daddy did in the Old Testament, and he's all the good stuff that's over in the New Testament, people will accept that. The Pope came out this week and said, the love of Jesus means that you will take vaccines because you love everybody. And I'm not going down the vaccine trail here. I'm just saying that they're trying to describe the parameters of what the love of Messiah really is all about. What are they doing? They're pushing their agenda under the scope of the love of the Messiah. Really? I act in his love if I do what you think is right. If I please you, I'm pleasing him. Really? But when you preach the authentic Messiah, people are going to get upset. They're not going to be happy about that. Because like it or not, Yeshua loves you, will forgive you, but he will also judge your sins and hold you accountable
Yes.
and require you to change.
Yes.
No one said anything about that. Well, it's more than just church attendance or synagogue attendance or congregational attendance. Who are you? You're the elect. The answer to the elite of the earth is the elect. And God's chosen you to be that answer. You're the body of Messiah. You're the redeemed ones, the remnant. You're those who belong to him because of covenant. You are the house of Joseph, called Ephraim. You are the house of Israel. You are the lost sheep that have been recovered and restored and returned and redeemed. You're significant. You are strategic to him. You matter. You have a role to play. May not be hands-on ministry to some group, but you have something that you need to do. Something. In front, behind the scenes, in the middle of something. People know it. People don't have a clue. Wherever it is that your hands are, that Yah has called you to put them, that's where you're to function and to operate. And it matters. If Moshe had argued Yah down and said, please, I'm out, get somebody else. Aaron could have spoke the language better. Aaron was known by everybody. Technically, Aaron might have been able to pull it off, but Yah's chosen vessel was the reject. He specializes in going to the trash bin and finding the heroes. So if you've been discarded and thrown aside and you think you failed so many times that it can't be rescued, you're probably at the front of the line. The ones that Yah's ready to choose. Yes, ma'am.
Spiritual warfare. The enemy wants to put us down to make us feel like we're nothing. I mean, we don't realize always that the enemy is doing these things. And we buy into these defeating identities that we can't get out of and can't change. But that's the whole lie. Because we're redeemed and he makes us in his image. And we can do all things that he has called us to do by his power and his might. So it's big spiritual warfare. The enemy wants us to not fulfill the promises of Yah or have his identity.
You're right. I mean, we have this identity in him that we have to seize onto. As Steve was saying, the journey and growing into that is where we're at right now. God says to Moshe, I've called you, I'm going to use you, etc. In chapter 4, in verse number 15, he's talking to Moshe about you give Aaron the message, and he'll speak it. He'll speak it for you. It says, in the last line, I shall teach you what to do. Moshe said, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a deliverer. My methodology didn't work. I think it didn't work because he wanted to use the authority of the prince of Egypt to rescue his people. And Yah says, that's not the right authority. I'll wait till you're broken down and then I'll give you my authority and I will teach you how to use my authority. Later on, Moshe is going to go in front of Pharaoh and say, you just tell me when you want the plague to stop. When do you want it to stop? You give me the time. I'll go outside. I'll raise my hands. I'll pray this prayer. It'll stop. When? Tell me what time. He does grow into his calling because Yah was teaching him how this thing works. But Yah did not teach him everything before he got started. It really does come back to the Torah 101 understanding of you learn by doing. It's in the doing you catch the understanding. If we wait till we understand and know, we'll never do it. Because God does not teach us that way. Be great if he said, Cheryl, here's step 1, 2, and 3. Go ahead and get started. Thanks, Master. I've been waiting for that. It doesn't work that way. Yes, ma'am.
And what you're saying is if we understand it all, we don't have to trust it. So that's why in the hour that you need it, you have to step forward and trust, and then he provides. But if it was the other way around, we wouldn't have to trust him. We wouldn't have the need to look to him in the same way. But that's what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to do. And that's why he gives it to us when we step out
Right.
in that faith.
If Kepha had listened to the other guys in the boat, he'd have never walked on the water. It's physically impossible for you to do this. You're asking to drown. Don't you know there's a storm going on? They got out. We hear there's only one man that ever walked on water. No, there were two. One did it much better than the other, but there were two. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I haven't asked this in a long time, so let me ask this before we pray. Out of everything that we've all said today, what did you hear? If you rehearse what you hear, it will stay with you. Otherwise, you go home saying, that was good teaching. What did it say? I don't remember.
Who you receive, who the identity that you choose to, I guess, identify with. Because, as you said, the world, everything, even yourself, the enemy, you can claim these things, but it's, choosing to claim the identity that he's given us, because then we can fulfill that destiny that he's called us to.
Okay. Anybody else? Did you hear something? There's a bunch of words.
And I think we don't think about how it affects other people when we're not walking in our destination, our destiny, and who we are supposed to be.
Okay.
When we don't realize who we are and who he's called us to be, then we can't be effective to those that we're supposed to be being effective and called to minister to. And we don't always think about, well, if I don't get up today and go do what I'm supposed to, we think it's just going to affect us, but it's not. It's affecting those that we are supposed to reach that day, minister to that day. Somebody said, I don't know if it's Mike or someone last week said, okay, when you get up in the morning, we should pray. Okay, Father, who am I supposed to minister to today? What do you want me to do? What do you have me to do today? And when we do that and we open ourselves up, He will open our eyes and show us the needs that are there right before us and give us what we need. Just like He said, Moshe was like, well, I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to do what you're telling me to do. And so many times in Scripture, He says, don't think about what you're supposed to say. At the moment that you're supposed to say something, you open your mouth and I'll fill it. If we study and show ourselves approved unto Him, we seek Him, He's going to give us the words that we need to speak at the moment we need to speak.
Someone else?
I guess don't wait till you feel ready to start doing the Lord's work, because you'll never feel ready. You just jump in and you'll grow into it.
Yeah.
Because it's in the doing that we learn, as He said long ago. The obedience brings that learning and that ability.
You're not defined by the past.
You're not defined by your past.
Yes.
Mhm.
Amen.
You can be, but you don't have to be. Don't have to be. Got a big amen back there, Marie.
Yeah, when we talk about identities, well, I mean, I have 4 of them. Basically,
You don't want to be in the middle of the
I was, born and raised in Catholicism, left, went into Pentecostal Christianity, went through the Messianic movement, went into Judaism, and it's like, okay, it's like, where am I? Where am I? I'm back here,
Home.
home. And what is his name? I'm so glad that you talked about
Mitchell.
relationships. Because our past doesn't define us. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it does. It means a lot. And I know that the journey I walked, I can never, even what we talked about last night, I can't go into that. But I have to stay connected with people. And, I feel like I'm home.
I come home and I know that Yehuda is never going to come to Ephraim, to bring the two together, because I don't know if you want to expand on some of that. But being involved with Judaism, and I'll tell you, we learned a lot of rich
Sure.
understanding.
Absolutely.
But God's brought us to a place where, when I think about Yehuda, I believe that we went through Judaism, coming back out, but we are Yehuda. We're coming for the nations. I feel like we're a bridge. Might not be recognized. My heart just cries out for people. A lot of people don't know where they are, especially with all this COVID.
Sure.
Just with this Catholic or this Pope. I watched that on TV. I heard what he said. But the same thing goes on in the Democratic or in synagogues, because it's all political and it's so breeding. And
Marie, if Yah has given you the identity of bridge, to be a bright and shining
it's
bridge.
been all my life is a bridge. My family, they even understand who I am. I am a bridge. They say you're rare, but I don't know what to say.
I think what you said is excellent. Thank
And
you.
I cannot cut myself off from, after we talked last night, like, God really dealt with me. I had to go on a long walk today, a long walk. And it's like, all of a sudden, I was like, I don't have to feel bad about, I felt like I was turning my back on my Jewish community, but I'm not.
No.
I'm not. I'm
No.
not turning my back on anyone.
Somehow these two sticks that we see in Ezekiel 37 become one. The stick of Yehuda is pretty well defined. We reckon
And
it.
Yehuda and synagogues are very,
They're very identifiable. I mean, we know that the stick of
very
Joseph,
stubborn, though.
it's a
Very,
pile of
very
sawdust.
stubborn. So I believe those who've gone through Judaism are coming out, and God's got a plan to go to the nations and, bring them.
Acts chapter 1, who was sent to the nations? It was a group of about 120 Jews.
Yeah.
He said, I'll raise you up and I'll send you. Start in Jerusalem, spread out to Judea, then Samaria, and then where? To the other parts of the earth. Go to the nations.
Matei Echad. One staff, one rod, one stick. Gotta be.
Yep.
It has got to be.
It's going to happen. It's happening. It is happening. May it happen to its completion in our day.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. Let's stand together. Let's receive the blessing of his name. Yivarakaka Yahweh vayishmareka. Yair Yahweh panavilaka vikuneka. Yisa Yahweh Nabilaka, Yasim Laka, Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious and favorable to you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you, and he may grant unto you shalom. Once more, let's turn toward Jerusalem. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod, Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Yahweh Eloheinu Melech HaOlam HaMotzi Lechem Min Ha'eretz. Blessed are you, Yah, King of the universe, who has given to us bread from the earth. Father, we give you thanks and praise for the bread of life, Yeshua, our Messiah. We may partake of him and live forever. Amen. Amen.